Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Sadi Dalid. We're in the middle of talking about the law that if blood from a chatat offering goes on a garment, then that garment has to be laundered. And so now we're going to talk about precisely what types of garments will require laundering. The Mishnah teaches, Nitaz al ha'or ad shelo hufshat eno ta'on kibus. Mi shehufshat ta'on kibus divrei Rabbi Yehuda. If the blood splattered onto leather. Now, most regular garments are made out of wool or linen. So leather also can be used as a garment. But what about that? Does that also require laundering? So the answer is it depends. If it has not been flayed from the animal, still attached to the body of the animal, then it would not require laundering because it's just part of an animal. It's not, you don't call it clothing when it's still attached to the animal. However, once it's flayed, now it's already considered somewhat. It's not totally ready to be, you didn't make it into a coat or into shoes yet. But even at this point, according to the Biuda, already it's somewhat called clothing and therefore, or cloth, and therefore it does require laundering. Rabbi Elazar omer af mi shehufshat. Rabbi Elazar said, even after it's flayed, it still does not require laundering. Why? Because according to Rabbi Elazar, that at that point, even though it's flayed, it's still just a raw material. You don't consider that a vessel, a piece of clothing. It's still going to have to go through a lot of processing before you turn it into shoes or a placemat or whatever you're going to use it for. You still have to process it. Rabbi Elazar, as the Gemara will explain, agrees that once you finish processing it, it becomes a keli, a usable vessel, a piece of clothing. Then it's mikabel tumah. Then it's a kli, it can receive tumah. At that point, yes, now it's a piece of clothing. Then it will require to be laundered. But before it's finished processing, you don't have to. And now, let's read this as a new statement. Eno ta'un kibus ela mekom hadam. V'davar shehu ra'oi lekabel tumah v'ra'oi lekibus. As a general rule, something who gets blood on it does not need to be laundered, except for the place of the blood. You have a big sheet. You don't have to launder the whole sheet. If the blood only went on one spot, you just do a spot clean right where the blood is. And also, only something that is fitting to receive tum'ah. We'll see, the Gemara will say, that this is actually the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Elazar, it does not need to be laundered until it's actually mikabel, something that's mikabel tum'ah, meaning when it's finished processing. But Rabbi Yehuda will say, even if it's potentially mikabel tum'ah, although right now it's not mikabel tumah, it's still unprocessed, or it's just not on the animal. If it's on the animal, everybody agrees, attached to the animal, you don't call that anything at all. But as long as it's detached from the animal, it's flayed, then it's potentially mikabel tum'ah. You have to do a couple more steps still, but it could be. And also, it has to be something that is launderable. It has to be something that you can launder. The Gemara will explain, not a vessel, something that's smooth that you don't launder. Echad habeged, vechad hasak, vechad haor, teonin kibus. Now, if it is clothing, a garment, it doesn't matter what it's made out of. Whether it's a beged, which is the typical thing, wool or linen, or sackcloth made of goat hair, or or is leather. All these things do require laundering. והכיבוס במקום קדוש, ושבירת כלי חרס במקום קדוש, ומריקה שטיפה בכלי נחושת במקום קדוש. Furthermore, all of this blood you have to get rid of that blood while in the temple courtyard. The laundering, you have to have some laundry mat on the temple courtyard. You have to do it there and get it out. And if it's blood of a dam chatat that you cooked in an earthenware vessel, you have to break that vessel in the temple courtyard. And if it's a metal pot, then you have to scour it and rinse it also in the temple courtyard. And this is a way in which the blood of a chatat offering is more stringent than the blood of any other offering, even more stringent than Kodesh Kodashim. Now, what is zeh going on? In fact, if it's a metal vessel, and you cook some other any sacrifice, Kodesh Kodashim, Kadashim Kalim in it, that blood that gets absorbed into the metal pot will eventually become notar and be prohibited to cook in again. So that part of it, that you have to kosher a pot that you used for any sacrifice, that will be true actually for any sacrifice. Rather, the zeh seems to be going on definitely the cloth, because clothing, you're not cooking in the clothing. So okay, you got to stain on the clothing. All right, so what if I want to live with the stain? If it's talking about other sacrifices, okay, you could live with the stain. But it's specifically dam hatat, that the Torah goes out of its way and says you have to launder it. And so too with the pots. Okay, that pot you can't use again. You can't cook it in again. Do you have to break it? For a dam chatat, you have to break it. Seems to be related to the idea that you can't take that blood outside of the kodesh. That's why you have to do all this cleaning, breaking, scouring in the temple courtyard, because that blood cannot be taken out of the courtyard. So all these laws are special laws that are stringent regarding chatat, and then some of them, but not all of them, apply to other korbanot. What is the source for this law that the laundering applies also to animal hide? The Tanur Banan, Beged, and li ela Beged. Medain rabot or mishehufshat, Tamudomar, asher yizeh aleha techabes. Braita quotes the pasuk. That is the source of it. If any of the blood goes on a garment, so it says a garment. I only know a garment, which typically means wool or linen. How do I know that I should include leather, a hide, if it's flayed from the animal? That's why the pasuk says, you shall launder that on which it is sprinkled. That's an inclusive term. Whatever it's sprinkled on, also, you should launder that. Well, once you're including things from asher yizeh, maybe I should include animal hide even when it's attached to the animal, before it's flayed. Now, that's why it says the word garment. Just like a garment is something that can receive impurity, so too anything that is fit to receive impurity. In other words, it doesn't have to actually be finished. When it's finished, then it's actually mekabel tumah. But ra'ui lekabel tumah is potentially, if you finish it, then it will be mekabel tumah. If it's still attached to the animal, that's too many steps. That's not even called ra'ui, not even potentially. But once it's by itself, now you could finish it, and then it would be mekabel tumah. So then you have to launder it according to the Yehuda, even before it's finished processing. Rabbi Elazar omer beged, en li ela beged minayin lerabot sak v'chol mineh begadim. Now, Rabbi Elazar learns the Pesukim a little bit differently. It says garments. I only know a garment. How do you know also sackcloth and other types of garments that are made out of other materials? Tamulomad asher aleha techabes. Pasuk says, you shall launder that on which it was sprinkled. So that's an inclusive term. Yachol shani merabeh or mishehufshat. Tamulomad beged. Ma beged davar hamekabel tumah. Of course, davar hamekabel tumah. So should I include even leather once it's flayed? Now that's why it says a garment. That means, just like a garment is actually mekabel tumah. Doesn't mean it's tameh. Not every garment is tameh, but every garment is susceptible to receiving tumah if it touches something tameh. So too, anything that is currently susceptible to receiving impurity. That means it has to be finished. The processing has to be finished. So therefore, it's not enough that it's a piece of hide that was flayed. It actually has to be processed into whatever you're going to use it as. It could be a doormat, which requires only a little processing. It could be a shoe that requires a lot of processing. However you have in mind, it depends on your mindset. If you say, I like it as it is, then it's mekabel tumah. I'm going to use it just like this. If you say, no, it's only raw material, I'm still going to do something with it, then it's not mekabel tumah. So that's Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Mai benai, what would be a practical difference between them? Amar Abaye, matlit pechuta mishalosh ika benaihu. If you have a small patch of cloth that's less than 3 by 3, talking about regular cloth made out of wool, and it's very small, less than 3 finger breadths small. So that's a small item. Mandama ra'ui, haname ra'ui, diba'e chashib aleh. According to the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says anything that potentially, right now, if you take a 3 by 3 little piece of cloth, you say that's not mekabel tumah because it's not usable. So that's standard law. If throughout all the laws of tumah and tahara, a small little piece of cloth, too small to be usable. However, it is potentially usable if I have in mind. Let's say I have in mind, this little shred of cloth, I'm going to use it for a patch. I have a hole in my jacket, and I'm going to use this for a patch. So then I'm giving it significance. If I give it significance to use, then it will be mekabel tumah. Now, I didn't do that yet, but since I could do that, so potentially it is. Therefore, the Yehuda says that will be mekabel tumah. That will require laundering. Manda mar davar hamekabel tumah hamihala bat kabulet tumahi. According to the Elazar, only if I actually decide to use it and then it's a kli, then it will require laundering. But right now, I haven't decided that yet. Right now, for me, it's just a little piece of cloth that's not usable. And so right now, it's not mekabel tumah. If it got blood on it, I would not have to launder it. We go by its current state, whereas the Yehuda says we even go by the potential state if it could be finished and used, or even thought about differently and used. Rava Amar, Beged shechishev ale l'sura ika benayhu. Rava says, Abaya said that one. Rava says a different answer. If it's a garment that you're thinking of, you're planning on embroidering with an image. So it's a garment, it's perfect, it's usable now. But I said, I don't want to use it plain like it is. I'm going to embroider, I'm going to add something to it. So at that point, it's not mekabel tumah because it's not finished processing in my mind. And all it has to do is the owner's mind, whatever you think it's going to be. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says if it's potentially mekabel tumah, this is potentially mekabel tumah because I could change my mind at any moment and say, you know what? It's too much work. I have to go embroider something. I'm going to wear it as is. As soon as I could decide that, it will be mekabel tumah. So since it's only a short step away from being mekabel tumah, therefore, even now, I will have to launder it. But according to the Elazar, it has to actually be mekabel tumah. Means it has to be actually now be finished. If I do change my mind and I say I'm going to wear it as is and it gets blood on it, then I will have to launder it. But right now, before I decided that, I'm still in the mindset that I'm going to do something with it. I'm going to embroider it. Then, if blood falls on it, I do not have to launder it. Rava Amar. This is curious that Rava said one answer and then he said another answer. If you look at the manuscripts, you will find actually that almost all the manuscripts say exactly this. Rava Amar. There is one manuscript that's in the Columbia University Library that says Ravina Amar. So that would be a different sage. However, almost all of them say Rava. Maybe Rava has two answers. Utzva dechashib ala lekatseah ika benayhu. We're talking about an unfinished hide that you intend to trim. You have unfinished hide that has all jagged edges, and my intention is, I'm going to make them straight, I'm going to make it into a nice shape, and then use it as a table mat or something. Manda amar ra'ui, ha'name re'uya. Manda amar davar mekabel tumah, ha'la mekabela tumah ad demiksa la. Similar to the previous story, that according to the Yehuda, since it's potentially able to be mekabel tumah, because I might just change my mind and say, I like it as is. I like the jaggedy edges. I like that look. I'm just going to use it as is. So since I could do that, even if I don't do that, I have to launder it. That's the Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar says, no, right now it's not mekabel tumah until I set it aside and decide until I actually cut it or decide that I'm not going to cut it. But you have to actually cut it or decide it's a finished product in order for it to be mekabel tumah. V'hatanya, and indeed we have a braita that supports this. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer, utzba shechashab aleha lekaseah teora ad sheyaksi aina. If you have an unfinished hide that you intend to trim, even though potentially it's usable now, if someone could like it like this. But if I intend to trim it, then it's not mekabel tumah. Even if something tameh touches it, it's going to remain tahor until I actually trim it. And ta'un kibus. The Mishnah said that only the spot where the blood is has to be laundered. The rest of it does not need to be laundered. Minahanemile de tanur rabanan yachol nitaz al miksat beged yehe kol habeged taun kibus Talmud omar asher yizeh lo amarti lecha ela makom dam bilvad. What's the source for this? It's from a baraita that says you might think that if some blood got sprinkled on a little piece of the garment, that I have to wash the whole garment. That's why it says asher yizeh, that on which it is sprinkled, only that part which got sprinkled with blood. Davar shu ra'ui lekabel tumah. Now, the Mishnah in this line says something that potentially can become can receive tumah. It says the word ra'ui. So we see setama kerebi Yehuda. The stam Mishnah, that part of the words of the Mishnah or stam Mishnah, is not a continuation of Rabbi Elazar. That's how we read it. We read it correctly according to this. That this is a part of the stam Mishnah, and the stam Mishnah doesn't say davar she mekabel tumah, but rather ra'ui lekabel tumah. Ra'ui lechibus lemeute keli. Davar gerida hu. When it says it has to be something that you can launder, that's excluding a vessel like a bowl or something. A bowl you don't put in the wash. You don't launder a bowl. Rather, you scrape the blood off it. So this law about laundering only applies to things that you would normally launder. The Mishnah taught that you have to launder whether it's a regular garment made out of wool, or if it's sak made out of goat hair, or hide from an animal. Also, if blood falls on it, you have to wash it. So this teaches us that leather is something that can be laundered. But here's the problem. Urminhu. Hayta alav lishleshet mekancha bismartut. Hayta al shel or noten aleha mayim ad shetichle. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat that says, if some bird droppings fall on a cushion and it's made out of regular cloth material, then you're not allowed to launder on Shabbat. So all you can do in that case is wipe it with a rag. Just a dry rag, push off the dirt, and that's it. You can't put any water on it because that'll be laundering. If, however, the cushion was made out of leather, then you can put water on it until the dirt will dissolve, which means that you're allowed to put water on Shabbat on leather because it doesn't get laundered. It's not considered laundering. It's considered like plastic, like something that is smooth and is not absorbing the water, so you're not washing it. So according to the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, there's no such thing as washing for leather, but our Mishnah here says that there is such a thing as washing for leather, because it says you have to wash out the blood that falls on leather. How can we figure out this contradiction? Amar Abaye la kashya, harabanan ha'acherim. Abaye says it's two different opinions. Mishnah and Shabbat is the opinion of Rabbanan. Mishnah Masechet Zevaḥim here is the opinion of Acherim. What do they say? The Tanya. Habeged v'asak mechabeso. Hakeli v'ha'od megarero. Acherim omerim habeged v'asak v'ha'od mechabeso. V'hakeli megarero. The Baraita teaches that regular cloth and sackcloth can be laundered, whereas this is talking about blood that falls on it from a chatat, and chatat blood that falls on a vessel or on leather, you just scrape it off. I mean, like a bowl is something that is smooth, so you don't launder a bowl, so you wipe it off. And leather is considered the same as a vessel, not something that's laundered. So this Mishnah, Masechet Shabbat, that says you can put water on leather on Shabbat is because that's not called laundering. Leather is not something that you can launder. However, Acherim, the other sages say that cloth and sackcloth and leather, if blood falls on it, you do launder it, and a vessel, you wipe it off. So you see here that leather can be laundered. So our Mishnah is following the opinion of Acherim. Keman azlaha damar Rav Chia bar Asher. Okay, now that we know that there's a machloket about this, who would be the author of the following story that Rav Chia bar Asher said? Zimnin sagin hava kaimna kameh derav. Rav Chia bar Asher says many times I stood before Rav as a student, v'shachshichi le mesane b'maya, and I would put water, I would wash his leather shoes, and he did this on Shabbat. So how is that allowed to do that on Shabbat? Keman Rabbanan. He's following Rabbanan. Rabbanan said over here that leather, there's no such thing as laundering with leather. So on Shabbat, you're allowed to put water on it. It's not considered laundering. And so he would do this many times for Rav, and Rav never said it was a problem. And so it must be that he is following the opinion, that they're following the opinion of Rabbanan. This story is going to come up another about 3 times as we go to different interpretations. We'll see how this story gets reinterpreted. Amar Rava, Umika leman de'amar or lav bar kibusu. Rava says, hold on. Are you serious? Is it really possible that there is such an opinion that says leather is not something that can be laundered? V'haketib, v'habeged o hashiti o ha'ereb o kol keli ha'or asher techabes is a pasuk right there in Vayikra talking about sara'at. And it says a garment or the warp or the woof of any article of leather that gets sara'at, you shall wash. So here the pasuk says you wash leather. Ela amar Rava, kera umatnitin berakin ki pelige bekashin. So Rava says, you know what? It can't be that this is a machloket about between Rabbanan and Achirim in general about all leather, because the pasuk says that leather, at least some kinds of leather, get washed. Rather, the pasuk and the Mishnah are talking about soft leather. Our Mishnah in Masechet here in this Masechet is talking about soft leather. Soft leather that can get stained and that you can wash. It'll absorb the water. You wash it out. You rub it out. And that's why it says techabes here and in our Mishnah as well. Whereas that machloket that we read before, that between Rabbanan and Achirim, and Rabbanan said here that that leather is like a vessel. That's talking about hard leather. If it's very stiff and smooth, it doesn't absorb. Then it is not something that can get laundered. V'amar Rav Chia, zimnin sagiin hava ka'imna kameh derav. Wait a second, but what about that story? Rav Chia bar Asher, now shortens his name this time, said many times, I stood before Rav on Shabbat and I put water on his leather shoes. Aren't his leather shoes soft? And that would mean that it's not something that there is such a thing as laundering soft, and it would be prohibited on Shabbat. So how could he do that? The answer is, bekashin uchrabanan. It must be that his shoes were made out of hard leather, and he's following the opinion of Rabbanan, who said that if it's hard leather, then there's no problem of washing. Hadar amar Rava. After Rava gave this explanation, then he changed his mind. Lav miltahi damari neku nemale likra dechi ketiban berakin ketiban. He said, can we tell the pasuk, oh, you pasuk, you're only talking about soft leather. It's one thing to make an okimta. We do that often on a Mishnah. Oh, that rabbi in the Mishnah, he meant it in this case and not in that case. But you really can't do that too much in a pasuk. The pasuk gives you across the board law that any cloth or leather that you gasarat, you have to wash. So who are we to tell a pasuk? Oh no, we're only applying you in soft. So we can't say that. Mila askinan bikli akesilgia habaim midatayam bekamadachamana nible kibus. The pasuk is talking about all kinds of things, including hard leather. Here's this word. Aski ligia seems to be talking about things that are important or noteworthy, maybe like an axiom. And so maybe it's fancy items like a hard leather bookbinding. So these are things that are in fact important things that would be made out of hard leather. And still the pasuk says there's such a thing as washing. Right? We should assume that the pasuk is including things like that. How can we? It's not a good interpretation to say, oh, the pasuk is only talking about soft leather. Ela amar Rava sara'at kevan de mi gufe kaparcha mechalchela le umshavi la rach. Says sara'at because it goes and sprouts from the item from the leather itself. It's going to cause it to get loosened and make it soft. So by definition, anything that has a leprous mark is going to get soft, at least that spot that you have to wash. So it's already soft, and therefore he can stick with what he said before. And fit it with the pasuk. And in fact, anything that's soft leather is something that can be washed. If it has sarat, by definition, the sarat is going to make it soft, even if it was hard before. Amar Rava, ikasheli hakasheli. But Rava says, okay, I solved that problem, but I do have another problem. If you're going to force me, I'll give you another question. Karimu satot derakin ninhu utnan hayta shel or noten aleha mayim ad shetichle. Cushions and blankets, which was the subject of the Mishnah in Masechet Berachot, in Masechet Shabbat, that we cited above, cushions by definition are soft. And yet it said, okay, if the cushions are made out of regular cloth, then you can't use water, just wipe it. But then the Mishnah said, if the cushion is made out of leather, then you can put water on it until the dirt gets dissolved. So how are you allowed to put water on Shabbat on soft leather cushions? We just said that's not allowed. Ela amar Rava kol kibus telet le kiskus la sheme kibus. So Rava now is going to add another part of a definition of laundering. That laundering has to include rubbing. Any laundering that doesn't have rubbing is not considered laundering. If you just wipe something that's dry, that's not called laundering. If you wet something and just leave the water there and don't rub it together, that's not called laundering, and that's why it's permitted to just put the water on the soft leather cushion. Now that we have this new definition, let's go back to that story of Rav Chia bar Asher, who would stand before Rav many times and would clean his shoes on Shabbat. And it says he would put water on them. Now, what does that mean, he put water on them? We can infer sichsuchin aval kibus la, that he would put water on them, but he would not rub them. So he didn't do the whole laundering process. So now we ask, why not? How come he didn't launder them and rub them and only put water on it? So we have two ways to explain it. Either they are soft, and everybody agrees that if the leather is soft, then it can be laundered. And it's a problem if you launder it on Shabbat. So you have to not launder it. You're allowed to put water on it. So that's what he did. And everybody would agree to this, that you're allowed to put water on soft, but you're not allowed to rub it. So that's exactly what he did. Or you can argue that it was hard leather, and he's following the stringent opinion of Acherim. Acherim said that there is also laundering when it comes to hard leather, and that's why he had to put water on it, but he was not allowed to rub it. You see, if it was hard leather and like Rabbanan, well, they say that there's no such thing as laundering for hard leather, and so therefore he would be able to rub it also. So that's why we're not following that, but it could follow everyone if it's soft, or acherim if it's hard. Wait a second. If so, that you if you don't rub it, then it's not called laundering, then for a garment as well. So how come the Mishnah in Shabbat said you can't put water on the cushion, you can only wipe it with a dry rag? Why not? Why can't you put water on it just like with leather? Because it's soft leather, and so it's the same thing. Beged shiriato zehu kibuso. It says, no, it's still different. With a regular garment made out of wool, soaking is laundering. So there is a difference. Only when it comes to leather soaking is not considered laundering. That's okay. For leather, you can soak it, but just don't rub it. But for regular garments, soaking, that's part of the definition of laundering, even without rubbing. So that explains the difference in the Mishnah between a regular cushion and a cushion that's made out of leather. Rava leta'amed, amar Rava, zarak sudar lamayim chayav, zarak pishtan lamayim chayav, pishtama sudar aved kibus, ela zera pishtan, mai ta'ama. Rava is consistent with his opinion because he said also that if someone takes a regular cloth and throws it and puts it into water, that's liable for laundering on Shabbat because it's a regular cloth, and even just soaking is called laundering. However, if he puts flax seeds into water, he is liable. Now we understand regarding the cloth because he's doing laundering. So that's the part that's consistent with what we just said. Ela zera pishtan mai tama. But we're curious, why is it prohibited to put flax seeds into water? V'chitema mishum de mikdach. If you're going to say because it sprouts, and so you're not allowed to put it in water because planting, usually planting is in the ground, but even if you just put it in water and you wait a while, it'll start sprouting. Is that why? Well, then wheat and barley also should be forbidden, because that also will start sprouting, but we don't have that prohibition. So hanach it lehurire. Oh, it's because flax seeds, when you soak them in water, there's some discharge, some mucus that comes out of it. Well, if so, then that's true also for hides. If you soak it in water, some stuff comes out of it. So what? Why would that make it prohibited? The answer is hatam kabid lisha. When it comes to flax seeds, that mucus and stuff that's coming out of it is like sticky, and it makes it stick together, and that is a prohibition of kneading. Like if you would knead dough, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. So this just soaking the flax seeds in water, make it like doughy, like kneading, and that is the problem with that situation. Tarash Rava, mutar lechabes min al beShabbat. One time Rava got up in a public lecture. A public lecture, that's when you teach a halacha l'maaseh. There's a lot of people there, and you're telling them the bottom line. In the Bet Midrash, with the students, you go back and forth and make all kinds of suggestions, possibilities, try to make a persuasive this way and that way. But in the Derasha, he's giving a halacha l'maaseh. You're allowed to launder a shoe on Shabbat, seemingly because he's talking about that it's leather and so on. Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, va'amar Rav Chia bar Asher, zimnin sagin hava kaim nakamed Rav, v'sachsechi le mesaneh b'Shabbat, sichsuchin aval kibus la. Rav Papa tells Rava after the lecture, and why do you teach everybody that you're allowed to launder shoes on Shabbat? We have that story. We already learned it many times. Rav Chia bar Asher used to wash his teacher Rav's shoes on Shabbat, but it says sichsuch, he would put water on them. Yes, but he would not rub them, he would not launder them. And you told people they can do a full kibus, they're going to get the wrong idea. So Rava says, you're right, I have to correct myself. Hadar okay Rava amora alev edarash. So then he got an interpreter. That's when you're giving a public lecture. That's how you know this is an official lecture, that you have an interpreter, like a human loudspeaker. You speak, and then he says it loud, and he spoke again and said, Devarim shamati lefnechem ta'utem biyadi, beram kach amru, sichsuch mutar, kibus asur. He says, listen, what I taught you the other day, that was a mistake. Sorry about that. In fact, what they taught is putting water on the shoes is okay, but fully laundering them, that is not allowed. Hakibus makom kadosh. The Mishnah taught that the laundering has to be done in a sacred place in the temple courtyard. And that's the same is true also for breaking earthenware that has absorbed blood of a chatat, and also of metal vessels. They have to be cleaned in the temple courtyard. What's the source? Tetanu Rabbanan. Techabes b'makom kadosh. It says, wash it in a holy place. That's pasuk 20. Shebirat keli cheres minayin tamud lomad uchli cheres asher tibushal bo yishaber. How do you know that the earthenware vessels also have to be broken there? Well, this comes right after. It's that the pasuk 20 ends b'makom kadosh. So this b'makom kadosh is also then telling you about the next pasuk, and also Kli cheres has to be broken there. Medikav shtifa bechli nechoshet b'nayin tamud lomad ve'im bechli nechoshet bushala morak v'shutaf b'mayim. That's the continuation of that pasuk. And it says, and also this. Also, the metal vessels have to be scoured and rinsed. So this is all these things have to be done in the temple courtyard. Ze chomer bechatat v'tuleka. Now the Mishnah says this is how the chatat offering is more stringent than other koche, even koche kodashim. Other koche kodashim, if it falls on a garment, you don't have to launder it. Only for dam chatat you have to launder. So this is what makes chatat more stringent. Right now we're assuming that this is the only way that a chatat is more stringent. So we ask, v'tuleka, really, is there no other way? Va'ika shenichnas dama lifnai v'lifnim. A korban chatat is more stringent in that its blood can enter the lifnim. If you have an inner chatat, there's outer chatat, there's inner chatat, that blood goes in. Whereas other korbanot don't have an inner type. When the Mishnah says chatat is more stringent than other kodashim, it's only talking about chatat. It's an outside chatat, not inner. You're right. Inner chatat would have something that's more stringent that they have to be sprinkled inside. But we weren't talking about that in the Mishnah when we made this comparison. Okay. Shim nichnesa dama lifnai v'lifneim pesula. But outer chatat offerings have a stringency that if the blood is, it's not supposed to be, but if you bring it into the sanctuary, then it becomes pasul. And that generally we think is not true for other korbanot. The answer is, the author of our Mishnah must be Rabbi Akiva, who says, oh, that's true for any blood, that except for an inner chatat, any other blood that goes into the hechal, as atonement, that you're bringing it there in order to serve as atonement, to sprinkle in it, that becomes disqualified. So in fact, our Mishnah must be the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and so therefore, yes, a chatat. The only way in which a chatat is more stringent is regarding laundering. It's not more stringent regarding bringing into the inner sanctuary. Sheken mechaperin al chayave karetot. Wait a second, there is another way in which chatat offerings are more stringent than others, because chatat offerings atone for sins for which one would be liable to karet if done on purpose. You did by mistake, so now you get atonement. That's a stringent thing. Why didn't you mention that also? And the answer is bechatat shmiat hakol. There is one type of chatat that you bring even though it's not something that you would be liable to karet. And that is if someone swears that they don't know testimony about something and it's false. They actually could testify. They swear falsely that they don't have testimony, and then they recognize their sin. They bring a korban hatat. Now this is a sin that even if he did on purpose would not be karet. So therefore, when we say this is a stringency of chatat, we're not talking about all chatats. There are other chatats that are more stringent in this way, but we were talking only about the chatat of shemiat kol when we made this comparison and said there's only one way in which chatat is more stringent, which is about laundering the clothing. Sheken tu'na arba matanot. Hold on, there's another stringency. Chatat offering has to be placed on all four corners. Other korbanot is only two that are four, or even only one. Kerebi Ishmael Damar Kol Damim Teonin Arba Matanot Shal Arba Keranot. Oh, our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, who says that for all blood offerings, you have to put it on all four corners. And that's why this is not a stringency. So if you follow all these things, in fact, yes, the only stringency we can find of a chatat, this type of chatat, over other korbanot, is that if its blood has to be washed out. Hold on. Even according to your reasoning, even if you have to put it on all four corners for everything, but what about the fact that a korban chatat has to be put on the horn? Not true for other korbanot. Maybe you have to do it with the finger, and you have to do it at the corner, at tip of the corner, and that's not true for other korbanot. So there's a lot of stringencies of a korban chatat. And then we say, okay, fine. When the Mishnah says it wasn't saying this is the only way that a chatat is more stringent than other Kodesh Kodashim. We're saying this is one of the ways, one of two or three. There are other ways in which a korban chatat is more stringent, but in this area here, regarding the blood and laundering, this is one of the ways of many in which a chatat is more stringent than other Kodesh Kodashim. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.